Welcome to the Upgrade Your Life podcast. This is Del Denny, and you are listening to episode number 6 with Dr. Paul. My guest today is Dr. Paul Ciurysek, medical doctor turned entrepreneur. What an amazing route to go from. Talk about a pivot. And so today's interview, we're going to talk about the lessons learned in business and life, the trials, the tribulations that comes with being an entrepreneur. You are not going to want to miss this one. This is a very unique interview. Stay tuned. So the big question is, how do ambitious people like us, who grew up listening to the old advice of go to school, work hard for 40 years, and retire when you're old, create a life today that is meaningful, abundant, healthy, and brings joy, while also leading a life that is productive and full of achievement? That is the question, and this is the podcast that will help give you the answers that you're searching for. My name is Del Denny, and welcome to the Upgrade Your Life podcast. My next guest is Paul Ciurysek, a medical doctor turned entrepreneur who went from crippling 6-figure medical school debt to selling his first company for 7 figures. In 2009, after being unable to find a job in medicine, Paul started tutoring medical students for their medical licensing exams. After recognizing the huge potential of this business model, Paul began leveraging his tutoring services with the power of the internet, and within a few short years built a company earning 7 figures and was able to pay off his medical school loan debts in full. After selling his first company in mid-2019, Paul is now starting a new venture in the same industry and is excited to share all of his trials, tribulations, and lessons with you here today. Paul, welcome to the call, my friend.
Del, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I'm very excited to have you here too. I'm excited to pick your brain because it's not often you get to meet a doctor that's turned into an entrepreneur. So tell me, how did this happen? Where did it all start with?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up with a very entrepreneurial mindset. However, I didn't grow up around entrepreneurs. So for me, I feel like I had this one mentality, but I had a great family and they supported me. But it was always go to school, go to university, go to get your master's, your doctorate, get something so you can get a good job. And growing up around that, you sort of become what people tell you should do, what you should pursue. And so I took the scholastic route. I went to school, I went to med school, but I always felt entrepreneurial, and I wasn't one of those kids who had lemonade stands or was selling things door to door, but I was always thinking that I'm an entrepreneurial person. I just didn't really know what to do with it. So I went to med school, graduated, and some of your listeners may or may not know this, but when you finish med school, then you have to reapply to residency, which is just an entire, it's like doing it all over again, and it's extremely competitive. There's very few spots, and there's a lot of applicants. And I was applying to get into things like plastic surgery. I really wanted to aim high, and I struggled to find a job. Excuse me, and out of necessity, I started to tutor students. I like I said, the entrepreneurial mindset sort of took over, and a lot of my friends were in the same boat, and they were working at Walgreens and CVS, just doing things that didn't make them happy, trying to make ends meet while they waited for the next year, because you could only apply once a year. And I started to tutor students, and I started to make a few bucks. I was able to pay some of my bills, but it wasn't really getting me to where I needed to be, especially with all the debt. And then what I started to do was I started to tape through Skype. I would record these tutorial sessions, and then I started to just basically package them and sell them online as full courses. And that's when I went from making $50 an hour doing one-off tutoring sessions to being able to sell an entire course for $2,000 or $3,000 and have it automated on the side. And once I started to do that, I started to, put a little bit of a dent into my med school debt. And the next time residency applications came around, I once again applied. And being Canadian as well, you need a visa, you need a lot of things to get these positions. And unfortunately, it didn't happen the second time. And, you know, um, I'm not one to wait for things to happen. I was bummed out, but at the same time, I had this venture that was starting to make me some money. So, you know, I said, you know, I had a long, tough conversation with my family, and I told them I wanted to pursue it full time. And my mentality was residency is usually 3 years. So I'm gonna give myself 3 years to earn as much as, let's say, I would if I had gone into medicine through my business. And within 3 years, I was probably doing double what I would have done as a physician. And you know, within 5 years, I was able to pay off, I mean, almost $250,000 of med school debt. It was, you know, very crippling med school debt that I know a lot of my peers are still trying to pay off. But so, you know, I feel very fortunate that I had that idea to do it, and that it worked for me. Yeah, so that's
Yeah.
basically the very short story that, you know, I could go on and on forever.
There's so many points to that I want to unpack, because it's amazing to
Sure.
me that, you know, from just the thought of, you know, school, you know, having a family, I said, you know, go to school,
Mhm.
and school is definitely important. But then there's also that gene in you that hey, I'm an entrepreneur. I know this is in me. I don't know how
Mhm.
to express it, but you know it's there. So like when did you say, hey, you know what, I'm ready to go down this path, and how to make that transition? Because you said you had a conversation with your family. It's almost like, hey,
Mhm.
I know you expected this out of me, but this is what I feel that my path is. So what did that conversation look like?
Um, so when I had the conversation, I was making a little bit of money, but, you know, it's hard for your parents, especially if they're not entrepreneurial, to see the potential in an idea if they're just not around that. They're not around the entrepreneurial individuals, so they don't see that, you know, yeah, you're making, you know, $2,000-3,000 a month. They don't see that that could turn into $2,000-3,000 a day, or, you know, $20,000-30,000 a day. They don't see that. So the conversation, I mean, it wasn't. I wouldn't say it was overly uncomfortable. It was just, I think there was some concern from my parents' perspective, because they understood how much debt I was in. They knew exactly the situation, and, you know, it's kind of uncharted territory for someone to forego residency and forego a career in medicine to try and make a business work. So, you know, they know I'm hardworking. That was established. There was no concern about whether I would do the work or not. But, you know, it was basically a big gamble if from their point of view, and I think it made them very uncomfortable. However, that was also a driving factor for me. You know, my parents did so much for me, and I wanted to make them proud, and I used that as motivation to probably, you know, 10x my efforts over the course of the next year or two. And as soon as I think I started to pay down my debt, my mom, you know, my parents were co-signers on my loan, so they would see the bills, and my mom would see that, you know, here and there, you know, twice a month I was paying 5,000, 10,000, even $15,000 towards my bills. And I think once they started to see that, there's a wave of calm overcame them, because, you know, they realized, okay, what I'm actually doing is legit and it's going to work, and I'm putting in the time and the energy to make it work. So, you know, once the results started to pour in, I think that's when everything changed. But yeah, you know, there was concern with the initial conversation with them, but I wouldn't say they never said no. They never tried to talk me out of it. It was just more of, you know, are you sure? Are you sure that this idea will work? And, you know, I'm not the first one ever to start a tutoring company, so I know that it can work. And, you know, the proof was in the pudding. And I within 9 to 12 months after that awkward conversation, I was making money. And I think from there it was smooth sailing.
That's awesome, and I absolutely love that. I mean, because that is what entrepreneurship is. It's going out there in that uncharted territory, and
Yep.
but at the same time, though, it's also it's great to know that there's been people that have come before you and set a little bit of a path. You know, we don't, as entrepreneurs, we don't always have to be the trailblazer in our industry, but sometimes in our families, we are the trailblazer, you know, for the entrepreneur path. Um,
Yep.
so when you were getting started, like thinking about, you know, where you're at today,
Mhm.
online business, you've gone from the medicine industry and into the online industry, now running an online business. What do you wish you would have known when you started out?
I think I would have. The thing that I wish I would have known is that it does take time, and you might have the best product, you might be the most knowledgeable person, but there's something to be said for just putting in the effort and trusting that as time goes by, you will start to build some recognition in the industry. You know, one of the things that I set out to do that no one in my industry was doing was to have a lot of content, to build a YouTube channel. Instagram didn't even exist back then, but YouTube was there. And one of the things I wanted to do was stand out. And so I created just feverishly, I was creating educational videos on YouTube, and the following was growing quickly, but the income doesn't necessarily come right away. And so the thing that I wish I would have known was that, you can be doing everything right from the get-go. And you could put in 12, 15, 18 hours a day. And just because you're doing all of that early on doesn't mean people are just going to bang down the door and pay you. There's something to be said for being patient and just putting in the time. Even with this new venture that I'm starting now, I mean, I'm known in the industry, but what we were doing at the old company, 6 figures a month, I thought I would just be able to transition right into that with my new company. And it's not happening right away. But I realized that you just have to put in that time. So patience, I think, is the most important thing. And not to get discouraged if you're not, killing it right away. That if you lay that brick perfectly every single day, eventually you'll get to where you need to be. But patience, I think, is the one thing that I'm relearning. Again, is super important, and you just have to put in the time. And with that time, the results will come.
Absolutely. And patience is something it's funny you say that, because I think about patience a lot, because as I, talk with other people, coach other people, a lot of them are younger than me. I'm 36
Mhm.
years old. And so, people are in their 20s will come up to me like, hey, what recommendations do you have for me? And it's
Mhm.
patience. You have so much
Yeah.
life ahead of you, and everybody wants
Yeah.
instant success and instant this and instant that. Patience is important. It takes a while to become an overnight success. It really does.
Y- Yeah, and there's a quote, and I'm probably gonna screw this one up, but I don't remember who said it, but it goes something like, "You're going to overestimate what you can do in 1 year, but you'll underestimate what you can do in 5." And it's so true. If you work your butt off for a year, you will see some results, but you have to let the snowball sort of build momentum to a point where everything's just gonna start coming your way. But yeah, you have to be patient, and you have to let that momentum sort of, you know, uh, you got to get that momentum going, and it takes time to do that, unfortunately. And I think, there's even people that try to come into the industry I'm in. They're popping up all the time, just like every industry. Someone pops up, every day, and I think they think that they're going to put up an ad and make money right away, and when it doesn't happen, they leave. Which, it's great for me, because I understand that, same thing with you. You understand that if you just keep doing the work and you stick around and let that momentum build, that eventually you'll get to a point where you don't even really have to do any work, and the money's going to come. With my old company, we got to that point where we could have just probably sat on a beach and collected money. And it takes a lot of time and energy to get there, but it's so important that people realize that patience is the most important thing. You have so much time to just do the work, lay the foundation, and the results will come.
Absolutely. Patience is critical. And then there's another part to that I want to add, with taking from your story there, is just that consistency. And I
Like you
think
said.
I think consistency is a neglected virtue too, because you see in the online business, everyone's, be your authentic self, be your authentic self. Well,
Hmm.
being authentic
Hmm.
is important for sure, but what trumps being authentic is being consistent.
Hmm.
Putting out content every week, your videos every week, adding value to your students every week. Consistency is what people are looking for. Sure, you can be your vulnerable self. That's fine. That's great. But
Hmm.
consistent effort over time really compounds. And so that's when you start seeing
Yeah,
results.
absolutely. Yeah, you can't just put one thing out and then wait for a year. You have to be consistent. And I think planning is super important to make sure that, you asked earlier, what are one of the things I wish I would have known. I think planning out what you're going to do in advance is extremely important, because you can come up with ideas on the spot for 2, 3, 4 weeks maybe, but after a while it starts to get a little stale, and you have to make sure that you're thinking ahead so that you don't have to use all your brain space trying to figure out, what am I going to post today or tomorrow. Coming up with that plan, and then even creating that content ahead of time, can allow you to do the other things in your business that you need to do to grow it, and not have to worry about spending 2, 3 hours a day building content. I mean, when I started this new venture, I sat down for a week and I created enough content to last me for 2 years. And now I can wake up, I can post what I need to post, and then I can go about my day. And that helps with the consistency. But I think planning for it is equally as important, so that you don't lose that momentum and that lose track of what you need to do.
For sure. So tell me, I've seen your videos. I love your videos. It's very very niche, very niche.
Yes, very
It's
much.
for a very those that are coming up in medical school, and
Yes.
great content. So tell me, how do you plan for your content? You said you've planned it all out, but tell me about that process.
Sure. So there's a couple things that I do to plan my content. The first is, so when we teach our curriculum, there's a very specific pattern that we follow from start to finish. Now, what we're focusing on is clinical skills, which is teaching students how to interact with patients, how to be empathetic, how to build rapport, all these things that are important for one of these specific exams, which is called the Step 2 CS exam, clinical skills. So what I do is, I basically will draw out, how does a perfect encounter go when I'm at the door about to walk in the room to the very end when I shake their hand and I leave. What are all of the big things that need to be done from start to finish? And then I break that down into just very micro steps. So for example, the way you knock on the door can impact the way the patient feels about you. If you're in your apartment and someone bangs on your door, you've created this sense of fright, perhaps. If you
Mm-hmm.
knock on the door gently, they think, okay, someone friendly's on the other side. So I would break down every single part of an encounter. It's a 15-minute encounter, into just these little micro pieces of information. And then I would just write them all out. And then I would say, okay, what can I talk about for, a minute? Let's say I'm creating content for Instagram or even TikTok, where there's a minute, a max minute, one video you can make. I will think, what can I say in a minute to create content for this? And then I might say, how can I expand on that for 7 to 10 minutes for YouTube? And what I'll do is I'll basically just go through the entire encounter, create 50, 60 micro steps. And based on that, ask myself, okay, what can I talk about for the 1 minute? What can I talk about for 10 minutes? And that would be probably the bulk of the content that I use. And then the other way I build content is just taking questions that students ask over the years and building a database of questions. And the thing is, what you get to a point where you've maxed out what you can talk about, because there's only so much you can talk about. If you're in fitness, if you're in my industry, you're going to hit that point where, okay, what else do I talk about? And I think what you have to realize is that you're recycling the same information over and over, because you're always going to have new people coming in to your business. You're going to have students who come up from previous semesters. So it's you build that core content, which for me I think is probably anywhere from 200 to 300 core pieces of information that I can talk about. And then once you've gone through that cycle, you look at it again and you say, how can I do it differently this time? What have I learned? What types of questions have people asked me over the years that I can put a little twist on this? And then you can go through it again and change it up and do it differently. I started doing this thing where I put my phone on my window in my car, and I just drive to the store and I'll shoot a couple of videos based on just a couple of these topics, a couple of questions. And you really can create endless amounts of content. You just have to, I think, have that core content that you need to teach your audience what they need to know. And then everything from that is kind of derivative and touches things from a different angle. So hopefully that answers your question. Kind of went off
Yeah.
on a tangent.
No, it's so fascinating to me. There's so many things I want to unpack from that, from talking about, doctors going into the office, for how you approach that. I mean, I don't, as someone that is trained in working with people and sales, persuasion, influence. Building rapport is important. Empathy is important.
100%.
And I would never
Yeah.
guess that transfers over to, in the medical field, but it certainly does.
Absolutely.
So tell me a little bit about that. I mean,
Sure.
how does maybe you can educate our listeners on what you tell people on how to build rapport and how to build empathy with those that you're working with.
Sure. So just some quick background. There's this, medicine is a business, and it's unfortunate that it is, but it is a business. And when you are hiring physicians, you want to bring in physicians who are going to do the best job at making your patients, who are your customers, happy. And one of the most important things is bedside manner. And I'm sure you've been to the doctor before where, I was just sick a couple of weeks ago, and I went to the clinic, and this doctor walked in, didn't smile, didn't even introduce herself, just said, "How can I help you?" I told her what was wrong. And I was literally in there for a minute and a half. She was in and out in that time. And I was like, this, I don't want to come back to this doctor. And if your business, which is your hospital or your clinic, depends on repeat customers, that doctor lost a customer. And from that perspective, one of the exams, the ones that we teach, is all about, is this student, do they have the skills, the personal skills, as well as the diagnostic skills? But a big part of it is your interpersonal skills. Do you have the skills necessary to pass an exam? And so this exam, if you can't build rapport or be empathetic, then you're going to fail. And what happens is when you go and you apply for a job, and the residency directors or the medical directors see that you failed this exam, it's a red flag, because they think, okay, well, this person might not be the type of person who's friendly, or they don't know how to build rapport, and they don't know how to be empathetic. And so it creates a lot of problems with the the business of medicine. And so what's important for us when we teach our students, and a lot of the students come from different countries, so there's a lot of cultural issues or differences that we have to deal with, but ultimately it really comes down to just a handful of things. When you walk in that room, the most important thing you can do right off the bat is smile, right? I always tell the students, smiling is free, it's fast, it's easy, and it requires no training. And the one thing that students don't realize, our students, is smiling is not just smiling, but what you're doing when someone sees you smile is it actually stimulates the release of feel-good hormones in the brain, serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine, and you can physiologically change someone's state just by smiling. I mean, if you've ever just walked in the store somewhere and someone, like a baby or a kid, looked at you and smiled, made you feel good. And there's a reason for that. It's because it stimulated the release of all these feel-good chemicals. And so I teach the students that you can change someone's physiology by simply smiling. And that's super, super powerful. And it's not just something that applies to this exam, but it applies in everyday life. When you walk up to a cashier, smile at them, and you'll see that all of a sudden they're much friendlier. There's just so many practical tips that I can teach my students that you can use anywhere. Another one is eye contact, right? Eye contact is super important for building trust, just likability. If you've ever interacted with someone who's just not making eye contact, it seems odd. It sort of makes you think something's going on here and it doesn't feel right. And we don't want that as a student interacting with a patient. That's going to lead to problems. It's gonna kill trust. It's gonna kill rapport. So the eye contact, the smiling, those are just two things you can do right off the bat that build rapport and put you in that sort of state where you are in flow with the patient. And you want that to happen in your everyday life too. You want someone to feel like, you're connected in a way. And these are all real subtle things. And, I could go on and on. There's other things like mirroring body language is a big one. Shaking hands. I can't tell you how many students say, do I really need to shake hands? And I say, absolutely you do, because if half the students aren't doing it and you do it, then you've got that leg up, because a strong handshake is, again, you're connecting physically with someone this time. So before, with a smile, with eye contact, you're connecting physiologically, but a good strong handshake can connect you physically, and that builds a bond as well. And, it's just, those are just three super simple things. So when we walk in the room, I teach students, smile, eye contact, a firm handshake, ask them how they're doing, if there's anything that you can do to make them more comfortable in the room, and then you can dive into the interview. But within 10 to 15 seconds, you can go from a place where you've got no connection at all with someone to a point where all of a sudden they feel connected with you, you seem friendly, so they like you more, and you're starting at the very top instead of having to build your way up. And I mean, you could do that with anybody. It's practical advice that anybody can use for any situation ever, and it will give you a leg up in life, in business, in everything, and it's super powerful.
That is super powerful. It's so easy to do, but so easy not to do as well.
Yeah, exactly. And so, you have to make that conscious decision that you are going to do it. And if you do it, I think your life gets better all around if you start to just implement these super simple things that are, like I said, are free, easy, and require zero training to do.
That's great. You talked about, that transfers in business and life. As a doctor, and you had so much schooling, so much training. What's some other things that you learned from the medical profession that transferred over into the business industry?
I'll be honest with you. I didn't learn a lot about business while in med school. It's not something they teach at all. There's no 3 or 4 hour class where they teach you how to operate a clinic. I think the one thing that I learned in medical school and in my training that translates to business is just that, you're interacting with a lot of people, whether it be other students, the attending physicians, patients. The one thing is just to learn how to be friendly and interact in a way that brings a positive experience to everybody you interact with. So, if let's say you're doing rounds in the hospital and you're interacting with a bunch of physicians, try to bring something positive to their day. I always try to enter a situation where when I'm with someone or I interact with someone, I want them to come out feeling better than they did before. And that's something that I always think is very applicable to business, whether you're meeting with a potential client, whether you're meeting with a new potential partner. If you can always make people feel good once they've interacted with you, that is going to help move you in the right direction. I think that's probably the biggest thing I learned while in med school that was transferable. But as far as any training for business in med school, absolutely none. They were more concerned about making sure you were properly trained so that you could become another cog in their overall operation. So I think that's one of the only things I could probably comment on that.
I want to talk about that too, because it's interesting. Sure. Being another cog in the wheel. That doesn't rub entrepreneurs well very much. What was your feeling with that? Did you know as you're going through medical school, you're like, this isn't for me, or you're like, okay, I can accept this? What did that mindset look like?
I enjoyed interacting with colleagues. It was one of the things that I did enjoy. As you know, entrepreneurship is very lonely sometimes because most of the work you're doing is just on your own. So I did enjoy having camaraderie. We're all struggling. We're all working long hours. So you have that sense of camaraderie, but I didn't feel like it was something I could ever do for the rest of my life for that exact reason. I knew that it was the path that I was going down, and I was okay with that. But I also always thought, I'll probably work for maybe 10, 15 years, and then I'll go into business for myself in some capacity. So it was one of those things where I was just going to accept that, this is how it was for me. And, looking back, I was devastated when I struggled to find a job. But the fact that I couldn't, it's almost serendipitous in where it led me. And I'm very, very grateful that, it seemed like the universe sort of made things happen for me to put me where I really wanted to be. Because even though entrepreneurship can be very lonely, there's nothing else that I'd rather be doing. Like if someone offered me a job right now, making $1 million a year as a doctor in a clinic, I wouldn't take it because at this point, freedom of being an entrepreneur is so much more valuable than any sort of monetary value you could slap on a job. So yeah, very, very grateful that it ended up working out this way.
And I love that so much. And I think really that's the moral of the story, because I think if people can relate to, hey, I'm in a job I don't like. I'm struggling right now. I'm just, I'm working 9 to 5. I can't wait till 5 o'clock hits. I can't wait till Friday hits. And, people put off their goals and their dreams. But I think this is one of those stories with your life of, hey, I've been there. I've struggled. I took a gamble on myself. I took a leap of faith, and I wanted to do what I did. And hey, the grass is greener on the other side.
The grass isn't always greener, but in this instance, 100%. Could not agree more.
Yeah. Absolutely. All right. So I've got a question for you. I ask all our guests this one, and this is kind of a reflection question. If you could turn back time and talk to your 18-year-old self, what advice would you give yourself for reaching your full potential?
I love this question. And before I give the answer, the reason why is because about 6 months ago, I started writing a book because I started to reflect on, if I could go back in time, what would I tell my 15 or 18-year-old self? And I came up with a list of basically 100 things that I've learned over the last 20 years that I would want to tell my 15 to 18-year-old self to sort of, let him or her know that this is what you need to do just to make things a little bit easier and a little bit better for you. If I could go back and tell my 18-year-old self anything, it would probably be get crystal clear on what it is you want, devise a plan to get there, and be willing to work harder than anybody else you know. I think those 3 things alone can get you absolutely anything you want.
That's good stuff. That is really good stuff. Paul, where can our listeners get in touch with you at?
Yeah, so I spend most of my time on Instagram. I'm at Dr. Paul USMLE, DrPaul USMLE. That's where I spend most of my time. I post every day. I interact with people there. I also have a YouTube channel, which is just Dr. Paul USMLE as well. I don't know that a lot of your listeners will probably get a lot out of that because it's all about training medical students. But yeah, check me out on Instagram. Follow me. If you have questions, hit me up. I would love to interact with you listeners.
Beautiful. And I would definitely encourage everyone to check out his YouTube channel, go on his Instagram, because it doesn't matter what the content is. I would love to see how people see how Dr. Paul delivers the content, his consistency to it. It's absolutely amazing. It's great stuff. So, well, Paul, thank you for coming to the Upgrade Your Life podcast. I got so much out of this. This was great stuff.
Thank you so much. This was awesome. Hopefully it was valuable for your listeners, but it was absolutely phenomenal being with you. And I'm grateful that you asked me to come on. So thank you.
All right. Thank you, Paul.
Thanks, Dale.
I hope you enjoyed our interview with Dr. Paul. Remember, you can learn more about Dr. Paul by following him on Instagram or checking out his YouTube channel. I'll be sure to put a link in the show notes. Today, we talked a lot about entrepreneurship and the mindset piece that goes along with becoming an entrepreneur, which is so critically important as an entrepreneur. I'll also add that in your entrepreneurship journey, leadership is an important skill set to develop. We spoke on this podcast about working with people and how important it is to have good rapport and to show empathy. That is what a good leader does. If you want to continue to develop yourself as a leader, I want to tell you about my online course, Leadership Academy. In this course, you'll learn intrinsic leadership. What does it take to be a leader in your own mind? You'll learn about external leadership. What does it take to lead people? And you'll also learn how to become influential, how to make an impact on others for good. If you want to learn more about my Leadership Academy, go to leadershipwaitlist.com. I'll add that link in the show notes. Well, that's it, my friends. Be sure to subscribe to this podcast to be notified when the next episode of Upgrade Your Life podcast airs. Well, that's it for today. This is Del Denny signing off. And remember, learn, lead, and live to your full potential.